Hello and welcome to another That's Just Wild Q&A, where we answer your burning questions about wildlife and nature. My name's Steve Backshall, and as always, I'm joined by...
Me, Lizzie Daly.
And me, Sarah Roberts.
For ad-free listening, our newsletter, special deep dive episodes, and members-only benefits, you can subscribe to us at that'sjustwild.com.
Okay, to kick things off today, first question is for you, Steve, from Eliana. Have you ever seen an animal that is now extinct?
This is such a melancholy question, and
It is.
it's a really sad one. In all likelihood, there are quite a lot of animals that I've filmed with that are now extinct or will be extinct. I've filmed with vaquita, which is the world's smallest kind of porpoise in the Sea of Cortez, and let's face it, they've not got long left. But there is one individual animal that I have filmed with who was the last of their kind. Do you guys know the story of Lonesome George?
Yes, of course.
Is that the tortoise?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the Pinta Island tortoise in the Galapagos.
So sad.
Very, very sad. So obviously Darwin's tortoises were a massive part of his coming to understanding his own theory of evolution by natural selection. The fact that in the different islands within the Galapagos are very specifically different kinds of tortoises that do not and have not interbred, and they all have subtle differences between them. The size of their saddles, for example, their overall size. And one of those was the Pinta Island tortoise. Now, they were very heavily used by sailors over the years who worked out that you could grab one of these tortoises that live for an extraordinarily long period of time. They don't need to eat very much, and they'd effectively just take them onto their boats, and they would keep them alive until they decided to eat them. And they did this with thousands of them over a very long period of time. And the Pinta Island tortoise was considered to be gone until someone found this one lone individual, Lonesome George, who was all on his own. And they took him into captivity in the Galapagos Islands, and they searched so hard to try and find him a mate. They tried to get him to mate with other relatively closely related species. Didn't work. And I filmed with him back in, I think, about 2003 with A Really Wild Show, and did all of these pieces about how he was the last of his kind. He was this animal that, they can live for well over 100 years, and he'd been around for a long, long time, and everyone knew that when he went, he would take his species with him. And eventually the inevitable happened. And so, yes, I met and filmed with and stood right alongside this phenomenal animal, which became a real symbol of extinction and about, how it can happen. Animals can and will disappear, even really iconic ones. And, he was this extraordinary, giant, wrinkled beast that seemed to be a little bit dinosaur himself. And he's gone, and we will never see his like again.
We like to be positive on this podcast, but I have to ask Steve.
You have to start it out with the most sad story you could ever hope for.
But I actually was going to ask you what really that felt like. Cameras aside, production crew aside, you're standing next to an animal that will become extinct. It's functionally extinct. So, you see it with other species like the northern whites where they still remain, but, once they die out, they'll be gone. What is that actually like when you're in that moment filming?
I was really moved. And I was even more moved when I heard that he'd gone because, we all knew it was happening. And I think it was about 2012 that he finally died. And, there is that finality to it that, makes things really, really hard. But I've kind of felt that same way whenever I've been dealing with any astounding animal that you kind of know its time is done. At the same time, I should say that, I did something on the Javan rhino way back in the late 90s. And back then there was only about 60 of them. And I and most other biologists thought they were going to be gone within 5 years, 10 years. And they are still around at approximately the same numbers now. And while that, still may only be 60 individuals, we are getting better at putting huge amounts of work and effort into saving particular species, because I think we realise and we understand quite what a powerful thing it is when one goes and goes forever.
Yeah.
Do we know how old George was?
So he was first seen on the island of Pinta in 1971. Who knows? Who knows how old he was? these tortoises have been known to live for 150 years plus.
Mm.
And he was a mature tortoise when he was found in 1971. So who knows?
Hopefully he had a good innings.
You can't go around kind of looking at the scoots like the rings of a tree, can you? Just being like, let's try and figure out how mature and how old this tortoise
I
is.
don't think so. I mean, looking at the sort of resources online, most people are saying that he was around about 100, maybe as much as 102.
Let's just take a minute to celebrate Lonesome George.
And for you, Sarah, this was actually a question that we recorded while we were at the Cheltenham Science Festival, and it's from Poppy Okocha, an ecological grower on a home and community garden scale and author of the book A Wilder Way, How Gardens Grow Us. And she asks,
is it possible to re-establish healthy numbers of insects in Britain without reforming industrial agriculture?
From one cheery topic to the next. Okay, insect populations are absolutely critical to life on this planet, especially when we think about the food that we eat and we think about all of the other creatures that live here and the plants that we live amongst. The insects are bottom level, super important. But unfortunately, we're seeing drastic decline in a lot of our bugs. Now, unfortunately, a lot of that is because of our industrial agriculture and the way that we use our land. Now, the pesticides that we use, the monocultures that we grow, the way we treat our soils, we till our soils. I don't know if you guys are, I'm a bit of a country bumpkin myself, so I spend a lot of time wandering around farmers' fields. I've got dogs to walk, right? But the tilling is when you see those great big rakes, essentially, that are attached to the back of the tractors that will rip through the mud and turn everything over. We used to think that was a really good way of restoring nutrients so that we can grow more plants, plant more things in there. But it is actually pretty bad, especially when we think about understated insects like our dung beetles, which play a really key role. So let's put it on a nice note. There is a positive there, and we are seeing a shift. We need to see a faster shift, but into something known as regenerative farming. This is all about utilizing nature to fix nature. So rather than growing monocultures, we should always have multiple different species growing at once. And that includes our grass. We ought to see clover. We ought to see buttercups. We ought to see wildflowers. We need to see that diversity. And that helps to restore our soils. And it's not just in terms of what we grow, but it's also in terms of the animal farming. We do need animals, even if you want to be vegan, even if you want to be vegetarian, we do still need animals because of the thing that comes out of their rear end more than anything, because that's very useful for restoring nutrients in our soils. So the more diversity you have on a farm, and the more that you can use nature and encourage nature in, then the more protected that area is when it comes to disease spread, or it comes to adaptation and surviving things like climate change, the better. So regenerative farming is definitely where it's at, but we do need to push on our industrial agriculture if we really do want to make a big difference to the protection and survival of insects into the future.
To make myself seem older than is possible,
Yeah.
when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s, if we went out driving of an early evening down country lanes, and I should say my parents had an Austin 7, which was an old car, which genuinely had a crank at the front that you could use to wind up at the front to make it go.
Cool.
How old
Come
are
on.
you, Steve?
Well, work it out.
I'm hearing
It is
George.
ancient. Everything was in black and white back then. But when you drove down a country lane in a summer early evening, the windscreen of the car would be covered in what's known as moth snow. So effectively, all of the invertebrates would be just smeared across your windscreen, smeared across the front of your car, and that doesn't happen anymore. And a lot of that's down to the fact that 97% of our wildflower-rich meadows have gone. They have disappeared. I am now president of Bug Life, the charity that protects the little things that rule our world. And in the last decade, our biggest drive has been for something called beelines. So beelines are a system of channels of wildflower-rich habitat that link up over the entire nation, and that effectively are little corridors for pollinators. And it doesn't have to be very much. It can be, you know, everything from window boxes to motorway verges. But if we can string up this network of beelines over the country, then it can at least give our pollinators a chance. I would encourage anybody who'd like to learn a little bit of something positive about what we can do for particularly bees and butterflies, please do look out for Bug Life's Beeline initiative.
There's also a lot of work going to put back at hedgerows, and also a really interesting one is the waterways and restoring the waterways, because as we know, a lot of bugs do rely on ponds and other water ways like ditches for their survival too.
In Cardiff, outside of Chippy Lane and the Drunks, there's an incredible connection of these wildflower patches. So the university have embraced this. So they have kind of hives on the roof and then these wildflower patches on the roofs of buildings.
I absolutely love to see that kind of stuff. So completely different topic. Which animal's bark is worse than its bite?
Oh, okay. I love this question. And I'm going to answer this not in a literal way, but in terms of, I guess, that phrase. So I would say the piranha. And predominantly because we have vilified piranhas in media, in horror films. You know, everyone's seen that scene where you've got this collective feeding behaviour and then humans enter the water and immediately they go for humans. So there's about 30 species of piranhas. For people who don't know what piranhas are, they're freshwater fish. They do have very pointy teeth and they are extremely good predators. They're opportunistic predators, but they're also scavengers. So, you know, one of the species you may know of, or is the most famous, is the red-bellied piranha. It's usually in mainstream media that we see kind of them feeding in that way. They're really important ecologically. They clear up a lot of the freshwater ecosystems. They feed on, you know, other marine invertebrates. They'll feed on a lot of carrion as well. So we perceive piranhas as these kind of big, dangerous, you know, soon as you enter the water, you're going to get attacked by them. And there's been instances where there have been these feeding frenzies and injuries where people enter the water, but it's down to a number of environmental factors. For example, if you enter the water and you start splashing, you will probably attract some piranhas. And if that piranha starts to feed on you in the way that they do, so they've got very sharp teeth, they'll kind of go in at speed, they'll kind of take a little nip out of you, and then they will start to gather in this collective feeding behaviour.
So has anyone actually been eaten by piranhas in that way?
I think there's been some cases of perhaps some young children being in the water and it escalating. And I cannot confirm or deny if that's absolutely true.
I have so much to say on this. How much time have we got? First of all, I just dashed off while you were saying that to get an actual piranha.
Oh, cool.
That's where you were going.
Because I kind of figured that, you know, if we're going to talk about piranhas, then I've got one. So why don't I just show it off?
Fantastic.
So you can see this is a dried red belly piranha. And anyone
cool.
who's watching this on YouTube will be able to see the interlocking, genuinely scalpel sharp teeth that it uses to grab a hold of its food, the lower jaw, which can protract forward to grab a hold of things that are in front of it. To back up what you've been saying, I have filmed in the water, underwater with piranhas for hundreds of hours, including one time in Suriname in a completely pristine river where I got in with my underwater camera and had giant black or red-eyed piranhas, each of which was probably, 30, 40 centimetres long, shoaling around. It was one of the most intimidating things I've ever seen, and they didn't bite me.
There you go.
Which would seem to back up what you're saying. But it does happen that classic James Bond frothing, burning water scenario can happen in certain situations, particularly when water levels are low and food sources are rare. And apparently all of this stemmed from Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt's first journey to the neotropics. He was shown by local people this whole frothing, boiling water thing with piranhas, and he brought back this image to America and therefore to the rest of the world of piranhas doing just that. It rarely happens, but it does, and I can prove it does because I lost my fingertip to it. And you're probably not going to be able to see this on the camera, but if I show it really, really close, you might be able to see a scar there where I lost the tip of my finger to probably a red-bellied piranha in a scenario in Venezuela, exactly like we were talking about, where the water levels were very, very low. And first of all, I had my hand over the side of the boat and just took the top off my finger. And then secondly, put a bit of meat into the water, and it was like a volcano. I've never seen anything like it. The water went absolutely berserk with them coming in, and they stripped the chunk of meat to the bone in conservatively 15 seconds.
Yeah.
It was epic.
So had you have leant further over the boat and put your hand back in, would that have gone?
Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully you'd think that you'd be quick enough to get your hand out of there before that happened. But yeah, I've seen footage of a heron, so decent sized bird, that was in the water, got a couple of bites. As it was trying to escape, it just got overwhelmed, overpowered. And yes, that was stripped to the bone in less than a minute. So it can happen. It absolutely can.
It can absolutely happen. But it's funny how it's just escalated in terms of our public perception of what piranhas are like, in that if ever you were to enter the water, they'll just immediately go for you. But I'd imagine it just depends on the environmental conditions, like you say. And also, Steve, do you go through airports putting down that finger knowing you'll never be found?
I got another one on another fingertip where my sound recordist, Nick Allen, who's a very keen fisherman, was fishing, caught a piranha and turned around and went, Steve, I've got a piranha. And I was on the camera. I went, oh, fantastic. And I turned around and he literally put it onto my finger and it just went, hang. And with a very, very satisfying crunch, blood pouring down my arm, and it made it into the programme.
Love it. Love it. Well, you've completely undone the question, Steve, because it was what animal
so sorry.
bark is worse than its bite. So everyone's now really scared of piranhas, but fascinating. Right. Okay, Steve, it's your final question. Here we go. Are there any wild animals that depend on humans to survive? From Lonesome.
I love it. So I had lots and lots of thoughts about this, but the one that I like the best is the honeyguide. So the honeyguide is a bird that's found, a pretty innocuous looking bird, the greater honeyguide and the scaly-throated honeyguide, I think. And they are a pretty innocuous looking bird found in Africa that have developed an amazing relationship with people and honey badgers. And the relationship goes like this, that the honeyguide will rock up, it will make a very, very specific call and very specific movements with its wings and its tail, alerting the other animal to the presence of a beehive nearby. It will then lead them to the beehive where they will take it apart, and the honeyguide receives a gift at the end because they feed on the grubs and the larvae. And in my head, that was a relationship that built up with the honey badger, and one that human beings kind of, snuck in on at a later stage. But reading about it, actually, it seems like that's not the case. So first of all, I found an article from the Journal of Zoology, which suggests that the whole honey badger side of things is a bit of a fraud and may not happen at all. And it's possible that it was set up by early filmmakers who'd heard that this thing happened and then just filmed it, kind of pretending that the honey badger was genuinely being led, but actually they're filming the honey
TV
guide with
wouldn't
one
do
camera
that.
and filming the honey badger with another and setting the whole thing up.
It's like the lemmings again.
I know. What I tell the lemming story.
Long story short is there's this incredible scene of lemmings launching, literally like cliff suicide, launching off this cliff, and there's thousands and thousands of them, and the sequences that literally got the perfect shot of these lemmings as they launch over the camera and off this cliff. And apparently it was just a production that had forced them off.
So you mean they actually don't do that naturally?
No, they were thrown off a cliff by the filmmakers. And obviously we wouldn't do that, being in that same industry. But it's just a scandal that came to light, I think, another 20 years later.
I'm mind blown.
And but for a very long time, it was thought that was a real behaviour.
Right through until quite, I would say, early in my career, it was a really common thing for filmmakers to hear about a behaviour and then set about making it happen for the cameras, rather than actually finding things and filming them. And there are a lot of things. There are some real skeletons in cupboards going back over the years to things that were absolutely faked. And with the lemming thing, we still talk about people being lemmings if they kind of effectively chuck themselves off a cliff because people believe that behaviour happened, and it doesn't.
Mad.
And it seems it may be the same with the honey guide and the honey badger. However, they absolutely do it with people. So, for example, the Hadza hunter-gatherers who are in northern Tanzania, it's been shown that being led to honey by honey guides improves their efficiency in finding a hive by 560%. And there are scientists who believe that this relationship between the honey guide bird and people may go all the way back to Homo erectus, So we're talking about 1.9 million years ago.
Oh, so good. Yeah, it's a really cool example of that kind of collaboration between humans and wildlife. Love it. All right, guys. Well, I think that's all we've got time for this week. Send your questions along to questions@that'sjustwild.com and we'll answer them on the show.
Now, we are just a fluffy duckling of a show, so any support is really welcome. You can follow us on your favourite podcast app, leave a review, it makes all the difference to the whole team.
And for ad-free listening, our newsletter, special deep dive episodes and members-only benefits, you can subscribe to us at that'sjustwild.com. Remember, we're on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and you can find us at That's Just Wild Pod.
Thanks for listening. We will see you next week.